Hi, my name is Janet Morris, and I'm giving a presentation today on inductive and deductive learning. As you see a magnifying glass and a pair of binoculars, I would ask you the question, which item helps you to see things more clearly? Well, it's kind of a trick question. The answer is they both help you see things more clearly, depending on what you are looking at. If you want to see something up close in greater detail, you use a magnifying glass. But if you want to bring the big picture into focus, you use a pair of binoculars. What would these approaches look like in the classroom? In this cartoon, we see a teacher who says, Caulfield, can you tell me the answer to question number 8? Caulfield says, if I do, I'll be doing you a disservice. And the teacher a little indignantly says, a disservice? And Caulfield says, when you just ask for answers and you get your answers, then you bypass the search for patterns. And patterns are where you find the answers, and the search is where you do the learning. Well, Caulfield may not be the teacher's favorite student, but he does have a point. There is more than one way to learn something. So let's look at the definition of inductive learning. Inductive learning is a student-centered process where you can discover rules by observing examples. It focuses on details and it works outward to draw conclusions. Much like using a magnifying glass, you can look at things in greater detail. The definition of deductive learning is that it is a teacher-centered approach where you focus on rules followed by examples. It starts with the big picture and it works toward greater detail. It's like using a pair of binoculars to bring the big picture into focus and working to find smaller details in focus. So in this chart, we see a simple comparison that shows us that inductive and deductive learning are actually the opposite. In inductive learning, you start with specific examples and you work toward a general rule. In deductive learning, you start with the general rule and you work toward specific examples. So let's take a step back. Before we can understand inductive and deductive learning, we must first look at inductive and deductive reasoning. Here's a very visual explanation of inductive and deductive reasoning.
Inductive versus deductive reasoning, a la Shmup. As you may have heard, there is more than one way to skin a cat, although none of them are endorsed by PETA. In the same vein, there is more than one way to apply reason. For example, you may decide that it wouldn't be a good idea for you to skin a cat, because all living things are precious and you may be incurring the wrath of God by so callously torturing one of his creatures. Or you might just realize that you've got too much homework to do tonight.
You got lucky this time.
Either way, there's a cat out there somewhere sighing a huge meow of relief. When it comes to reasoning, there are two main ways to do it. By using inductive reasoning, or by using deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning, otherwise known as the top-down approach, starts with a general statement, theory, or hypothesis, and then works its way down to a specific conclusion by examining various pieces of evidence. For example, if you hypothesize that Dr. Seuss hates cats, and you provide examples from the Cat in the Hat that you feel support that hypothesis, you can deduce that Dr. Seuss does in fact hate cats. And let's not even get started on how he feels about thing 1 and thing 2. Inductive reasoning, or the bottom-up approach, starts with a small observation or question and works its way to a theory by examining the related issues. It's a bit more exploratory by nature than deductive reasoning, like, how does Dr. Seuss feel about cats? Well, he has this cat do some really dumb stuff, and he keeps getting it in trouble, and the kids get angry at him, And he looks weird. So yeah, Dr. Seuss doesn't seem like a big cat fan. You could also try using seductive reasoning, but you'd better look good in a nightie.
Once we understand inductive and deductive reasoning, we can use those processes to help us in our teaching through the use of indirect and direct instruction methods. The teaching style that's most closely associated with inductive reasoning is indirect instruction. This is a student-centered approach that focuses on concepts, patterns, and abstractions, and emphasizes concept learning, inquiry, and problem solving. Direct instruction aligns most closely with deductive reasoning. This is the teacher-centered approach that focuses on presenting facts, rules, and action sequences, and it emphasizes presentation, recitation, and teacher-student interactions. Once we understand inductive and deductive reasoning, we can utilize the concepts in teaching through indirect and direct instruction. And finally, we can apply those principles to inductive and deductive learning. To apply the principles of inductive reasoning to inductive learning, we look at strategies, question and answer, group discussion, problem solving, research. These are all things that will help the student learn the concepts. The process involves comparing and contrasting, in-depth examination, and analysis. And the outcomes are reasoning skills, common sense, and a strong work ethic. When we apply deductive reasoning to deductive learning, we can implement strategies that include lecture, fact sharing, and recitation. Processes that might be used are note-taking and memorization, with an outcome of mastery of information and increased knowledge. So what conclusions can we draw about inductive and deductive learning? Both approaches have merits for use in education, and both can be used cooperatively for a more thorough understanding of content. Choosing which approach to use is really dependent on the desired outcome and goal of the educator. I found some really good resources online for using the inductive and deductive method in teaching, and I wanted to share a few of those with you. The first website I wanted to share with you is a website by a man named Larry Ferlazzo. His website is larryferlazzo.edublogs.org, and he has a whole page, or lots of pages, on websites of the day. And this particular one is about inductive learning. And as you can see, as I scroll down, he has about 50 essays that deal with different aspects of inductive learning. He has one that talks about ideas for English language learners using the inductive approach. Learn about President Kennedy using the inductive model. Learning inductively works. Lots and lots and lots of articles that will give you insight into teaching inductively. The next website I wanted to show you is called cultofpedagogy.com. This site was constructed by a teacher, and she has tons and tons of resources. So when you go to the site, if you search inductive and deductive, you'll come up with lots of great information. She's got a lesson plan on inductive learning, but I think one of the greatest things about this site is the use of videos, which I'll show you. She's got videos on lots of different topics: instruction, classroom management, educational technology, advice for teachers. She's also got a blog on lots of different topics, including instruction, classroom management, technology, learning theories, leadership, career, professional development, book reviews, hot topics. As you can see, lots and lots of resources for the teacher. So even though there are some great resources about inductive and deductive learning, and the video is very clear and concise, there are many other resources as well. Finally, I wanted to share with you a website called elearninginfographics.com. This is a website that is really great for visual learners. I found an infographic that talks about chunking. This relates to giving small chunks of content to students to help them learn it better and more quickly. This relates either to inductive learning or deductive learning, but I thought it was a great infographic. And in the larger picture, this website has tons of infographics on lots of different topics. So if you're a visual learner, you can get an infographic to just give you the big picture on a great variety of topics. So let's look at a few questions about inductive and deductive learning, and I'll give you a few moments to think about each one. The first one is, how is each approach to learning represented on Bloom's taxonomy? Does one approach require higher levels of thinking? If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, as I'm sure you are, you'll know that some of the higher levels of thinking are comparing and contrasting and analyzing and researching. And those are the types of skills that are required for inductive learning. So the inductive approach does require a higher level of thinking. Question 2, let's look at this one. Which approach to learning tends to be more factually accurate? And why is this true? When we use deductive learning, we use if-then statements to draw conclusions. And those statements are very typically true statements. So if we have two true if-then statements, then our conclusion is going to be true as well. When we're using inductive learning, we use observations that may or may not be true across the board. And so sometimes our conclusions are not quite as factual as deductive learning conclusions. Our final question is, in comparing the two approaches to learning, why is inductive learning a better fit for some subjects, while the deductive approach works better for others? I'll leave that question with you to ponder on your own. And I've got some sources at the end where I drew my information from. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks so much.